A very good evening to all. It's time for Children's Bedtime Treasury with Let Emotion Speak. Today's story is about the dog with no voice. Don't forget to like the video, share the video, and subscribe to my channel for more bedtime stories each night. There once lived a prince whose words were pure poetry. He amused the court with his witty, rhyming verse, yet his kind and thoughtful words made him popular with all. It was said he could even charm the birds from the trees. One day he was walking in the forest when he came upon an old lady with a huge bundle on her back. "Let me help," said the prince. He took the load and walked along beside the woman. They chatted away, and before long they had reached the old lady's door. Now, the old lady, who was really a witch, had been listening intently to the prince's words. "What a fine voice he has," she thought to herself. "I would like my own son to speak like that. Then maybe he could find himself a wealthy wife and we'd be rich for even more." "You must be thirsty," she said to the prince. "Let me give you something to quench your thirst to repay for your kindness." The prince gratefully accepted and was given a delicious drink which he drained to the last drop. He was about to thank the witch when he began to feel very peculiar. He found he was getting smaller and smaller. He looked down at his feet and saw two hairy paws. Then he turned round and saw to his horror that he had grown a shaggy tail. He tried to shout at the witch, but all that came out of his mouth was a loud bark. The witch hugged herself for joy. "My spell worked!" she cackled. "Come here, my son," she called. There appeared at the door a rough-looking young man. "What's going on, my dearest mother?" he said in a voice that sounded familiar to the prince. Then he looked down and exclaimed, "Where did you find this poor little dog?" Now the prince understood what had happened. "The old lady has turned me into humble hound and given my voice to her son. Whatever am I to do?" he thought miserably. "I can't return to the palace. They'll never let a stray dog in." He turned with his tail between his legs and trotted off forlornly into the forest. The witch and her son were delighted with his new voice. She made him scrub himself clean from top to toe and dressed him in the prince's clothes. "Now go," she said, "and don't return until you found a rich girl to marry." The young man set off, eager to try out his new voice. Soon he was feeling very pleased with himself as he talked to passers-by. "What a very polite young man! And what a wonderful way with words!" people cried. "He could charm the birds out of the trees," other people said. The witch's son travelled far and wide until at last he came to a castle where he spied a fair princess sitting on a balcony. He called to her, and straightway she rose and looked down into the garden, enraptured by the sound of his beautiful voice. She was enchanted by his fine words and guessed they must belong to a prince. Soon the princess and the witch's son were chatting away merrily, and to his delight, when he asked her to marry him, she readily agreed. For one with a beautiful voice, she thought to herself, must indeed be a fine young man. Meanwhile, the poor dog prince wandered in the forest, surviving as best as he could by foraging for roots and fruits in the undergrowth. Feeling truly miserable, he stopped to drink from a stream. As he dipped his long dog's tongue in the cool water, he caught sight of someone sitting on a bridge. It was a pixie fishing with a tiny net. "Cheer up," said the little fellow. "I saw everything happened, and I think I know how we can get your voice back." And with Follow that, me. He was off, dancing away through the forest with the dog prince trotting along behind. They seemed to go on forever, and the dog prince was feeling very hot, and the pads of his paws were quite sore. By the time they reached the castle, he could see the witch's son in the garden calling to the princess on the balcony. The dog prince's eyes filled with tears, for she was quite the loveliest girl he had ever seen, and he wished he could marry her himself. "We will be married today," the witch's son was saying in the prince's voice. "I will await you by the church, my fairiest one." Seizing his fishing net, the pixie leaped high in the air. As the words, "my fairiest one," floated up to the balcony, he caught them in the net and gave them back to the dog prince. As soon as he swallowed the words, the dog prince could speak again. "Thank you, little pixie," he cried. "But what can I do? Now I'm a dog with a prince's voice. The princess will never marry me." "If you want to break the witch's spell, you must go to the church fast," said the pixie. And with those words, he disappeared. Straight away, the dog prince ran to the church door. There was the princess looking most perplexed, for standing beside her was the witch's son with not a word in his head. "I don't understand," she cried. "I thought I was to marry a silver-tongued young man, but now I find he's a dumb ragamuffin." "I can explain," exclaimed the dog prince. The princess spun around. "Who can explain?" she asked, for all she could see was a dog in front of her. "What a handsome dog!" she cried, bending down and kissing him on the nose. To her astonishment, the dog's hairy paws and shaggy tail immediately disappeared, and there stood the prince. But, you are the, but he," she stammered, looking from the prince to the witch's son. Well, the prince explained everything that had happened, and after that he and the princess were married with great rejoicing. And as for the witch's son, he wasn't a bad young man, really, so the prince taught him to speak again with a beautiful voice, and he married the prince's younger sister. So all well that ends well. Now it's time to say goodbye and good night.